Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of First Gen Homies, aka College and Career Coffee Chats. I'm your host, Delicia, aka Deli the Explorer, your resident hype tia, grad school fairy godmother, Señorita Alarcón, all these titles that students have given me over the years. I'm so excited to be back and chatting with the community that I've built through this podcast, through posting on social media about college readiness, career, study abroad, all these levels of the academic journey. And it's been a couple of months since I last posted on the podcast. And I want to thank everyone who has been listening, who continues to listen, old episodes, sharing old episodes. I really, really appreciate it. And there are a couple things that I want to talk through today on this solo episode podcast. We will begin having guests soon, very soon. But before I get into details on the podcast and launching and all of that, I just want to share some life updates. Number one, the obvious one is the podcast name change. I don't remember if I've officially um, announced it, or I think I did, but very briefly. So if you're new here, welcome. Now it is called First Gen Homies. It used to be called College and Career Coffee Chats. And that is because I love coffee and I love chatting with friends and homies about career, academics, study abroad, all the things. And I realized that it wasn't resonating with me anymore, that name. So I decided to transition to calling it First Gen Homies. And why do I believe that this is a new, fresher name? Is number one, it's shorter, quicker to remember. We're still going to drink coffee. So if you have your coffee, cheers. If you don't have coffee, make sure you pause, go get a nice warm brew, iced coffee or tea or whatever energy drink you would like. Water, we need to drink water maybe. So whatever you would like to listen in on this coffee chat with me now. So the name change came through with a conversation with a colleague who manages a Facebook page called First Gen. Oh, I'm blanking on the name right now, but I'll post the details. It's something with first generation students. And I always called her homie, First Gen Homie. And one day she was like, why don't you call your podcast that? I know you've been thinking about changing the name. And boom, there it is. It resonated, it felt in alignment. So First Gen Homies is what we are now calling it. And I want to be clear on what I define as First Gen. Any guest that comes on my podcast, they define First Gen for themselves and for the audience. For me, I want to look at First Gen in a more inclusive way, in a more inclusive manner as to what we see in a textbook definition of first generation and how people define it in the literature or in the academic journals. I want it to be expanded into not only international students who are here, but also students like myself. My parents did schooling in Paraguay, which is where they're from. My mother started law school and also got her bachelor's in English language learning in Paraguay. So technically, under the textbook definition, I wouldn't be considered first generation. However, I am first in my family to receive a US based degree, bachelor's and master's. We'll talk about that next. Um, so I consider myself first generation, whereas the textbook definition might not define me as such. So I want to broaden this conversation, and that's why I bring on so many different guests and different that have different life experiences and journeys to talk us through their experiences and what they define as first generation. So welcome to the new refresh brand, First Gen Homies. It's more fun and more I think my personality will still going to be drinking coffee, that's for sure, because I love coffee, iced coffee, regular coffee, all the coffee. So that's kind of an update on that I wanted to really explicitly talk about it. And the lesson I learned through that is the permission to change my mind, giving myself permission to change it, right? I'm the one creating this content. I'm the one creating this podcast, and the people that are here with me, we're co-creating the space. So I get to change it if I feel like it. And who knows, maybe down the line, a couple of years from now, I'll change it again. But the heart of the mission of the podcast is to share stories that people don't necessarily hear day to day in our experiences, to increase representation of people that look like us. First generation, I identify as Ameriwaya, first generation Paraguayan American, first in my family to receive a bachelor's and master's in the United States. I've traveled abroad, I've lived abroad. So I have a lot of life experiences and stories that I want to share, but also colleagues who have similar experiences and they want to share their journey and their experience. Um, so I want to create that space and that platform to co-create with them. So that's the summary behind that change. And you can follow on social media, First Gen Homies. I'm on TikTok and also on Instagram, where the podcast will live there, as well as my other pages. And the video format of the podcast will be under YouTube in Deli Lingo Academy. I'm just going to house everything there. So much easier. So if you ever want to see the video version, go there. And if you want to see the audio or hear the audio version, that'll be where podcasts you hear it. Apple, Spotify, um, iHeartRadio, Pandora, it's everywhere, wherever podcasts are heard. So wherever you want to listen, it's there. So that's permission to change your mind and pursue what you love and live into that truth, right? I spent so many weeks and months ruminating on should I change it? Oh my God. And it's like permission to do it. And if I don't like it, I can go back to college and career coffee chats. It's really simple. I changed the name on the website and it's done. Like there's not that big deal about it. Sometimes I feel like we make a big deal out of things that feel right, but we want to justify it in many different ways. So that's the podcast. Now, second update that I am so excited to share is that I finally graduated from NYU, hence these mini graduation cap and my little flag that we got at graduation, celebrating. And I think it's important to celebrate with community that are listening or watching. So if you're listening and don't see the YouTube video, I'm waving my NYU GSAS flag they gave us at graduation at Yankee Stadium. And I'm officially a Master of Arts from New York University, NYU, and I'm so, so, so excited. I shared some parts of my journey in grad school and some moments, but I didn't share daily vlogs because I was doing the most. And we're going to talk a little bit about my grad school journey in this part one of the podcast. There will be a part two of this podcast, welcoming back to re-energizing the space. So this part one is kind of closing that chapter or that book of academia in terms of schooling for right now. Who knows? Maybe I'll go get my PhD later on because your girl loves school. Your girl loves reading and writing. So for right now, I'm good. And this is also part of the conversation around my sabbatical. And sabbatical for me means resting, pausing, really digesting, really processing my experience. The last 2 years were intense, and we're going to talk about it a little bit now, but also in part two. And then in next episodes, I will slowly drip out my grad school experience because I think it needs its own space to live and process with you if you're listening or watching. If you have questions about the journey, all the way from like thinking about grad school, applying, accepting and going through it, graduating, all those steps, it's long. It's a rite of passage in many ways. It's an initiation in many ways. And we're going to talk about that in part two separately. But right now, in this first part, I want to celebrate. And if you have something to celebrate, you just got a job offer or you just got a redirection email, like a rejection email. If you got a rejection from a job, or if you got an acceptance, or if you got whatever you want to celebrate in career, in life, take this pause and celebrate yourself. If you haven't celebrated, do it right now. Pause this podcast and celebrate. I'm celebrating you. I'm going to wave my flag for you. Yay, we did it. Because it's so important to celebrate even the fact that you are thinking about applying, or that you submit an email question, or you start writing your personal statement, or you send out an email to your recommenders. Every step of the process has to be celebrated because it's hard work. It's mental work. It's academic work. It's all the levels of work. So I want you to celebrate yourself as I'm celebrating, and we're co-creating and we're co-celebrating together. So let's take a deep breath. and relish in that moment. How exciting. And grad school was a journey. And graduation week, 2 weeks of celebration was a journey. We're going to talk about all of it. Um, we're going to drip that content throughout the next couple of months because, like I said, I'm on sabbatical, which doesn't mean I'm not working. I'm still working. If you would like to work with me one-on-one, check out my offerings on my website, on my social media accounts, ask me in the DMs, send me an email, delilingo@gmail.com, and we can chat and talk through things. And I'm working on other projects and other spaces with high school students and college students. So sabbatical doesn't mean no work. It just means that I'm physically not in an academic space right now. I plan that intentionally to not maybe be in a PhD program right away or be working at a university because I need separation to process and digest what I've kind of been through. And I also believe that graduate school or undergrad or any collegiate experience is an initiation rite of passage and also um, a huge journey and transition that we don't really talk enough about. And I want to bring that up on this podcast and with the people I bring. So we're going to talk about that in part 2. So in this particular part, I want to share a couple things with you. First and foremost, I want to give thanks because you've all listened or continue to listen to the podcast. And like I said, your girl was doing the most in grad school. I was working with the Latinx project. I was grad schooling hard. Your girl was grad schooling. I was a TA, adjunct professor, or teaching assistant adjunct with Professor Myers in anthropology and working with high school students in New York City for college admissions. I'm still working with them. And then I was working also as a graduate assistant at the Latinx Project. If you don't know their work, check them out. They're doing amazing work. If you're in the city, go to their events. They have great things going on. So my work was graduate student coordinator supporting grad students in their experience at NYU. So your girl was in a lot. So the podcast and everything else kind of fell to the side, but we're back. We're back. So I want to pay homage to my thesis and the project that I started this grad program with in mind. A little backstory, I started this idea 10 years ago when I was in undergrad. I would say maybe 10, 11, 12 years ago when I was in Spanish language and Portuguese undergrad courses, talking through dictatorships in Latin America. And I realized Paraguay was not mentioned. Paraguay is where my family's from. And this really deeply affected me personally because my grandfather, Mario Esteche de Alarcón, he started something called Movimiento 14 de Mayo, and an armed group of students and revolutionary leaders started this in direct opposition to the dictator at the time and the longest in South America. And he was not mentioned in history, in this history class in Latin American studies when all these other dictators and revolutionary leaders were named. So I obviously took that to personally because that's my grandfather, that's my historical lineage, family lineage history. So that really sparked the interest to position not only my grandfather's legacy, but my legacy and my grandmother's legacy interpolated in this historical narrative. And that started the journey of what eventually became my master's thesis project at NYU. I was in the program EXI, Experimental Humanities and Social Engagement, which was an interdisciplinary program that supported this work indefinitely, and I'm incredibly grateful for them. So I'm going to spend this time talking a little bit about who I worked with and giving thanks and gratitude to these people and individuals who supported this work, because without them, I don't think this baby project would have been birthed. And I say birth because it felt like that experience of an idea growing, 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 and finally being ready to be shared to the world. And we use birthing as a metaphor because, right, the mother has the baby in their womb space for 9 months, and then the baby is physically born, right? So I'm going to use that metaphor, though I'm not a biological mother at the moment. We can still see those parallel moments. So I don't want to say that I know the experience of mothering a child into the earth because I haven't done it in this lifetime yet. Um, but I do understand the metaphor and the conversation around it. So I'm going to use that metaphor in this space. So I hope that resonates. And I'm sure a lot of you have had projects or ideas that you've put into place and seen the lifespan of it and birthing it into existence so it can exist in this world. So we take something esoteric in a way, an idea, and we work with it. We harness the idea, we kind of marinate it, and then in many ways it's birthed into spaces. It can be an essay, it can be an idea, it can be anything really. Like if you want to go for a run, let's say if you want to run a marathon or a half marathon, you have to have the idea, right? And then you have to work towards that idea, exercising and preparing for it mentally, physically, energetically, spiritually, to then show up on the day of the race and actually run the race. So a lot of work happens before you actually get to the race, if that makes sense. So a lot of work happens before I finally submitted that piece of paper and got the degree, right? So here's my thesis, my baby, my birthing baby. And she thick. She's a little thick baby. So I'm gonna just read the title so you know what it's called. It's called What Remains: Oral Histories and Police Records in Paraguay's Archivos del Terror, a master's project in XC, experimental humanities and social engagement, in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the degree of Master of Arts at New York University. And my advisor was Dr. Zeb Tortorici. So though I handed it in May, this was working and existing in my space for the last 10 years. So I want to like share that also, is that if you have an idea or you want to go to grad school, you want to do something and you want it to happen now, maybe realize that it might take some time. And honestly, I'm glad I waited because she this is what some of my best work, some of my best work. Um, So this project, very briefly, you can read the abstract and you can read the introduction on a website that I will share in a minute. Because in conjunction to writing this, I created a documentary called Heroínas del Movimiento, which is a little picture here. And a brief synopsis is: through family archives and national archives, the short film explores Paraguayan history, specifically Movimiento 14 de Mayo, 1958, in Asunción, Paraguay, founded by Mario Esteche, notario, and the woman who made up the movement is specifically the life of Delicia Méndez de Esteche, which is my grandmother. And I was able to accomplish this through the Tinker Grant that gave me funding to go to Paraguay in August of 2023 to do this research. The Latin American and Caribbean Studies Department at New York University that worked with the Tinker Grant to facilitate and disperse this grant. CINE CLACS Film Club, which was run by Johanna Morales at the time, in the KJCC auditorium, with the support of Jordana Mendelson in Spanish language and Portuguese. So thanks to all these people I've already mentioned, my thesis advisor, right? So I'm paying homage to my thesis, right? And you can learn more about it, like I said, on the XC website, because I was awarded the Herbert H. and Rose Hirschhorn Master's Project Award, which I'll share on social media, as well as my link tree. If you would like to see the trailer for this documentary, if you would like to donate, because I have ideas to bring this to the big screen. I truly believe this story needs to be told on a greater scale. And I'm grateful that it was part of this thesis project. It was part of this community at NYU. And I wanted to live in Latin American studies departments and history departments, and share with students who study Latin American and Caribbean studies who may not know this history. So that's the reasoning behind doing this work. So like I said, I'm going to give thanks to supported me, first and foremost, my parents, my brother Mario, my parents Delia and Rafael Alarcon, and my mother, Delia Victoria. Esteche de Alarcón. Gotta include Esteche because this is like Esteche family lineage right now. So my parents, my brother, without their support in logistics and helping me move back and forth from New York City, right? I'm currently based in Florida, and listening to my ideas about this project for years, which means my undergraduate professors who supported me have listened to this for years, for years. So thank you to Dr. Michelle Farrell, Dr. Geraldine Johnson, Judy Primavera, other Kath Borgman, Carrie Rivera, all these people who supported me on this journey. Of course, my grandmother, Delicia, like I mentioned, Delicia Ramona Mendez Esteche, and my grandfather, Mario Notario Esteche Notario. They, without their story and their lineage and their life experiences, this work would not be possible. And why I'm here in this moment celebrating this thesis project through this work. Professors at NYU, like I mentioned, a couple of my thesis advisors, Zeb, my XC professor advisor, Nadja Milner-Larsen, Lori Cole, the director of the program, Peter Lucas, he was my independent study professor and documentary professor, or in human rights and documentary professor, Jordana Mendelson, in Spanish language or Portuguese, my classmates who supported my ideas and helped me process my writing, understand the text we were reading in class, and also Professor Diana Taylor, which I use a lot of her theory in my work, as well as this book, Silencing the Past, Power in the Production of History by Michel Rolfe-Trouillot. A lot of my thesis research is based on this work, this foundational text for my analysis. And then, of course, my friend, my beautiful friend, Tatiana, who helped me edit and kind of work through all the footage that I got from my trip in Paraguay and Asunción 2003, as well as footage I've had over the years of my grandmother and my grandfather and my family, my Esteche family in Paraguay, especially my tia Ruby. She's my grandfather's sister, as well as the Latinx project space and people in community, because I spent a lot of time and work doing this work in those spaces, physically writing and reading. So I want to thank Arlene Davila, Gabriel, Javier, Orlando, Jessica in the Latinx project space. Like I mentioned, NYU CLACS, Tinker Grant, Johanna, Morales, Ana Luisa. Of course, the city of New York, Manhattan, the NYU campus and community always sparked a lot of magic and a lot of inspiration. And then, of course, in Paraguay, where I actually took this work and did this work last summer in the Archivos del Terror, which is housed in the Palacio de Justicia and el Museo de la Justicia, Centro de Documentación y Archivo para la Defensa de los Derechos Humanos. So it's housed within the courtroom, which is interesting. We'll talk about that another time. And without Rosa, Graciela, Rodolfo, Mila Rivarola, and Margarita Duran, this project, I don't think would have really taken shape in the way that I needed it to, because I went with the purpose of finding the archive footage, any documentation around my grandfather and his imprisonment in Asunción during this time. So they helped me locate these archival materials to be able to work and write this thesis, which is the groundwork of my art analysis and the documentary footage. So it was two, writing and the footage, two parts to this project thesis. And like I mentioned, my undergraduate professors. So if you have made it to this point, thank you for listening. If you have questions about my research, if you have questions about grad school, questions about how do I move and navigate all these different spaces, please let me know. I will start addressing some of the things that I want to share from my physical lived experience in Asunción last summer of August 2023. I'll be sharing on social media. Follow Memoria Histórica Paraguay for more of that information and content, which is really focused on this thesis project in Paraguay. I'm going to start crowdfunding for this documentary to be edited more professionally and longer. It was only a 30-minute synopsis of footage that I've had for probably like 10 episodes if we're doing episodics. So it's a journey, and I understand that. But I want to demarcate this point where I received the master's. That's done. I have the degree, and I published this work. It's in the ether at NYU, and I want to demarcate and be grateful for this award that I received, two awards, the Tinker Grant and the Hirschhorn Award through XC department, because they're really in a material way proves and shows that this work matters and that people are listening to this work. And that's really, really exciting to see Paraguay represented in this way, because if anyone studies Latin American studies or historical geopolitics of the region, they know that Paraguay and other countries as well are usually left out, right? Bolivia, Uruguay, the smaller nations. But obviously, as Paraguayan American, that's priority and importance in my own historical understanding of the region. And I also lived in Paraguay for about 5 years. So I have a deep, deep rooted connection to the land and the people and my family, right? Um, and being able to accomplish this on a world stage of New York University, NYU matters. Like I mentioned, as a first gen Latina, my parents are immigrants to this country, did not speak English when they arrived. Were able to go through this experience with me, support me in any way that they could, and really be my own personal cheerleaders in this moment and those experiences, championing me. And I understand not everyone has that foundation of familial support. And that's another reason why I created this podcast and this space to talk about it. So I hope this reaches the people that want inspiration, support, motivation. Please, if you have questions, if you have any doubts or feelings of that your work or your voice doesn't matter, it does. It really does. So please, please, please say the thing, do the thing, show up in the project that you want to show up. If you have questions, like, let me know. Let's chat about it. Let's see how I can support you. And if I don't know the answer, if I don't have the support in place, I will share your work with someone who might be able to support you and help you. So I really, really want to say that on my podcast space and on my social media networks. Like I said, my sabbatical coming up is not, it doesn't mean I'm not working. It means that I'm going to intentionally be working again on the podcast, supporting one-on-one students through any of the programming I have offered is one-on-one coaching, group coaching program. We're going to talk about that in part 2, what I'm going to begin to offer again. If you need help with your resume, interview preparation, application cycle, personal statement writing, those are basic things that I offer immediately right now. And in part 2, I want to talk a little bit about something new that's emerging, right? Especially if you're Latina, identify as Latina woman. I want to really talk through grad school goddess energy, tap into that. And we'll talk about that in part 2. And the work I'm going to tap into the NAP ministry work, Rest as Resistance in the sabbatical year. Enjoy as resistance. I'm going to share things that I'm reading, that I'm learning, that I'm doing. And I'm an academic scholar at heart. I'm an archival researcher at heart and historian. So I will be reading academic articles and books from my sabbatical to continue this conversation and work. So that doesn't mean that I'm not doing work as a sabbatical. I don't know why people think that automatically I'm not doing work, but I just want to make that abundantly clear. And another thing that's going to be shifting, I used to write a lot long form on Instagram. I will still be showing reels and fun pictures and day-to-day experiences, but the long form text of my analysis and writing will be on Substack now, or a blog on Substack. I used to have a blog when I did Fulbright in Brazil through WordPress, but it's really clunky. Thank God Substack now exists, that it's really simple. So I'm moving all those long form analytical conversations that I want to have in academia into that blog post. So make sure you can follow me there. It's going to be Deli the Explorer. Everything is Deli the Explorer, except YouTube is Deli Lingo Academy. And I also have on Instagram, Deli Lingo Academy, First Gen Homies, Memoria Histórica Paraguay. So those are kind of the 4 pages that I will be operating from. Deli the Explorer is my personal one, where I share all things about life, academia, changes. Then we have First Gen Homies, the podcast. Delia Academy will be transforming into more of the academic conversation spaces of supporting like career, interview prep, grad school stuff. Everything will be lived and housed there. And then Memoria Histórica Paraguay is really only about my project with my thesis, Movimiento 14 de Mayo and Heroínas del Movimiento. And Heroínas del Movimiento is really centering women of the movement, centering my grandmother in this particular case. So this larger project is to center other women. That's why I want this to be a long form episodic, perhaps. So if you would like to donate this project and believe in this work, please let me know. How I would really greatly appreciate the support. But we're starting with the matriarch of my family, my grandmother, Delicia, and her story, and then we'll include the other stories as well. But I define my grandmother as an heroína del movimiento because my grandfather wrote books. He wrote articles. He was invited to speak when he was alive. Rest in peace. He passed away 9 years ago. And now it's time to talk about the women. My grandmother did a lot. My great grandmother did a lot. My aunts, my great aunts, my mother, my aunt, they were part of the movement as well. Maybe not at the forefront, like they weren't jailed, they weren't protesting, but they were in the home preparing meals, taking care of the children, going to work when women were not allowed or were not supposed to be working. They were supposed to be homemakers only. My great grandmother and my grandmother had to go to work, right? So in spaces where they didn't necessarily in society view that as a positive, they had to be an heroína or a heroine in that moment. So those are the stories I want to tell. And we'll see how that evolves. If you like the work, if you want to support my work, want to support me, please donate to the crowdfunding source. And I have other projects coming up that I will talk about in part 2, more related to the Living Academy, Grad School Goddess Energy, Delia the Explorer Study Abroad Fund. So what else? Make sure I'm saying all the things. Yeah. Follow all the things, all the pages, whatever resonates with you. You don't have to follow everything, but if I'm sure something resonates somewhere. So I'm so grateful for you, the listener, here, supporting my work, sharing my work, liking my work. I'm incredibly grateful. I'm so excited. I finally got the degree in this world. That matters. And we can talk more about that too. But I wanted you to relish with me and my baby. My 2 babies, my thesis and my documentary. My babies. I buried them. So thank you so much for being here. Listen, share, subscribe, all the things. All my information's on the website, www.deliciaalarcon.com. My social media accounts, Delia Explorer, Delia Academy, First Gen Homies, Memoria Histórica del Paraguay, YouTube, Delia Academy, Substack, Delia Explorer. So with that, my friends, we're going to say a little cheers. And we're coming to a close on this podcast episode. This is where I'm at right now, September 17th, 2024, which we'll talk about on part 2. But if you're into the Astros woo-woo and you made it this far on the podcast, it is a partial lunar eclipse in Pisces. I'm not an astrologer. I'm a student of astrology, but I love that energy. It means something. It means something in this world, in this life, to be synced up to the moon and the stars and the sky. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that in part 2, because if you know me from Delia Explorer and you've been knowing me for the past 10 years, is when I really started showing up on social media, is probably the last 5 or 6 years. But if you know anything about me, you know I like the woo-woo, I like the astrology, but I also love social justice. So, my friends, if you made it this far, free Palestine, you know, Black Lives Matter. And I have a whole YouTube video about books that you can read that I've posted in 2020, you know, when things popped off in 2020. It's on YouTube. Check it out. It was a live I did about books and stuff that you can read. I mean, I think we're past reading and learning, but and we need to get into action. That's part three. We're gonna talk about that in part three. Okay. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. I want to demarcate this moment of graduation, which was in May, and we're in September. But you know, we need time to process and digest and go through life. So, and it's back to school week. It's second week back to school for NYU students. So I'm in my feelings, seeing everyone go back to school, and I want to go back, but not right now because I'm on sabbatical. So, my friends, thank you for listening. Until the next one.